Hey everybody, it's the Mayor Joe Helly, and today we're going to talk about how we can create a subdomain brute forcing tool in Python. If you haven't done the previous video, which is our DNS enumeration tool, go ahead and check that link out in the description below, and come back here when you've done that. There's going to be some really important information there, including the use of tools like Visual Studio Code, the DNS suite or the DNS Python library with Python is going to come into play here as well. So again, if you haven't done that, go ahead and check that out. Additionally, if you have already gone through that video and you've created your own DNS tool, share that in the comments. I would love to see what you guys have done, whether you've put it on GitHub or just talk about the process and some of the things you've learned. That would really mean a lot to me. So knowing what we do about DNS resolution, again, when we talk about DNS resolution, we're talking about resolving a typed out domain name to an IP address. Again, we cannot feasibly remember every IP address for all the websites we go to. We cannot remember the IP address for youtube.com, mobile.youtube.com, Gmail, MSN.com, Microsoft.com, LinkedIn.com, etc. There's no way that we could feasibly remember those IP addresses, but what we can remember is the word equivalent or the string equivalent, which is those domain names. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to leverage the DNS Python library for subdomain enumeration, and what we'll do is we will look for A records that belong to subdomains, and we will grab those as valid or invalid. There's other ways to do this. You can make URL requests. You could use a request library to see if you're getting 200 errors, 300 errors, etc. But for me, this is kind of the best way to do it. So this is what we're going to stick with. So if we refer to Visual Studio Code now, let's go ahead and import dns.resolver. And again, this is going to be the import that we'll use to conduct the resolution task that we need. Let's go ahead and set a variable called IP value, and that's going to be dns.resolver.resolve, and we want to resolve accounts.youtube.com, and we want to look for the A records. Again, here we get some information. That's one of the beautiful things about Visual Studio Code. It tells us somewhat what's going on with each of these different calls that we're doing, and that's going to help us out just in general, and it will help improve your knowledge. So now that we have that variable for IP value, let's go ahead and do if IP add or IP value, excuse me. So if this is true, if this comes back with an A record as true, we want to go ahead and just print subdomain found. Let's go ahead and save this, and we'll just run Python 3 subdomain enum.py or .py, and you see that we get subdomain found. That's great, but what happens if we don't get a valid subdomain? Let's go ahead and type that in. We'll save. Just fudge the subdomain however you want. If you run it, we get an error, right? We get this error that says dnsresolver.nxdomain. The DNS query name does not exist. That's because it's not real. We know that this is not a real subdomain. So we need an exception handling for this. So if you remember from our last video, the way we do exception handling is to use the try statement. And we'll need to indent these lines to encapsulate them or put them into this try statement. Then we need an exception. So we need to accept this error here, dns.resolver.nxdomain. So accept this. And again, if we highlight over it, we do get that information about nxdomain. Simply, the DNS query name does not exist. And then what we'll do here is we'll just print subdomain not found, and then we will quit. Let's go ahead and save, and I'll go ahead and clear my screen, and we'll run this again. And we're getting subdomain subdomain found because it's correct. Now if we test this fake subdomain, we should get subdomain not found. And again, because this is going off of a truth statement, right? If IP value is true, if it comes back as a valid DNS resolution, it will print this. But if it does not come back, so again, it comes back with an error, it's printing subdomain not found, and it's quitting. So that's why we have this. However, we don't want to just type in this all the time, right? We want to be able to enter information into the command line or to simplify our process a bit. So let's go ahead and we're going to import the sys library. And if we highlight over sys, it talks about what it is. We're going to be looking for the argv, and we want command line arguments. So we can do Python 3 subdom enum.py. We can do the subdomain, so we can do accounts, and then we can do youtube.com. And that's how we want to look for our subdomains, and that's how we want to be able to query them. So really quick, let's go ahead and do, we'll do subdomain equals sys.argv1. And we're doing that because if we come down here, we do Python subdom enum.py, if we do accounts youtube.com, the first value in the arguments is always going to be 0. And if we look here, our command or our program is 0 because it's based off the start of Python. So whatever our executable is, we're looking at that as there's no value. And then everything, for the most part, that we do in programming starts at a 0 value. So if we start under that assumption, this is our 0 value, accounts is our 1 value, and youtube.com is our 2 value. So that's why we're making subdomain sys.argv1. And then we'll do domain equals sys.argv2. So now we can simply change this value here. We're going to go ahead and use f because we want to be able to call these variables that we have here. So now we can type in subdomain dot domain, and we need to encapsulate that in squiggly quotes or squigglies as well, and save it. Now if we run Python 3 subdom enum.py accounts youtube.com, we can see subdomain found. And that is because, again, it's looking at IP value. And if IP value is true, it will print that as found. And then we get the exception. And this comes from the error that would say that the subdomain was not found or it's not present. So, excuse me. Works really easy. System arguments are great. However, we don't want the inconvenience of having to constantly type in a subdomain in a domain. We want to be able to call from something. And one of the things that we can do is we can call from an array. An array is really just a list. So I'm going to pull up browser window here really quick, and I'm going to back up a few spaces. And let's go ahead and I'm going to Google dnscan subdomains. And we can just click on this GitHub page, and we can see there's different subdomains available here. We have 100, we have 1,000, 10,000, 500, etc. For the sake of this exercise, let's just go ahead and click on the 1,000. And if you're not aware with GitHub, if you've got something that's in readable text format, you can click on raw typically. So if you click this raw button, we get this in raw format. And we can copy and paste this, right? If we go back, this is hard to copy and paste. If you select all, you're selecting the entire page. If you want to copy it this way, you've pretty much got to scroll down here and do this mess, which really is not efficient. So if we click the raw button, we can now Control A and Control C. Precursor really quick, we're going to use a tool called Notepad++. Hopefully you guys have heard of it before, and hopefully you've used it before. Notepad++ is really, really great. And it's got a ton of features. It's very feature rich. But we're going to use it for conducting a bit of regular expression. Regular expression is a pain in the butt. I don't know much of anything about it. Anytime I need to use it, I Google use cases and for specific things I want to do. And in this case, we need to be able to format this list into the array format we need over here. So let's go ahead and start generating an array. We're going to delete subdomain. We're not going to use subdomain anymore. That's just going to be completely out of the question. We don't want to have to type in our subdomains all the time. So what we need to do now is go ahead and switch domain value here with the system argument from 2 to 1. And what we want to do is we want to create an array called subdomain array equals, and our arrays are in open and closing brackets. So if we look at the format that we want to read from in our list, we need to do, we're going to encapsulate those values in single quotes. So we're going to do something like www, then we're going to do comma, then we're going to do mail, comma. We're going to do accounts, comma. We'll do cPanel, etc. And this is the way that our array has to be configured, or the syntax of it, in order for Python to be able to read it the way we're going to use it. So knowing that, let's go back over to our list. Let's go ahead and copy that list. So Control A and then Control C. And if you don't have Notepad++, I really recommend getting it. So let's go ahead here really quick. We'll do Notepad++ in Google. Click the Downloads button, and then download. The new one is just fine, and then download the version that's best for you. And then once you've done that, go ahead and come back to us. So we can go ahead and copy our list. And let's go to Notepad++, and I'm going to pull that up over here. Now, I don't think I can make this any bigger. Maybe. Control mouse wheel up. Okay, we can a bit. So we paste our list in, but as you can see, this is the same list as the browser over here. This will not work for us in our Python array, right? We need it to be in this format as we see here. So what we can do, again, is use a bit of regular expression. Again, I know nothing about it. Please don't ask me in the comments, how can I do regular expression for something else? I'm going to have to Google it and pull my hair out trying to figure it out as well. Just know that for what we're doing here today, the command we're about to use is really, really good for what we're doing specifically. So we've got our list. Go ahead and hit Control H. And that's going to pull up the replace window. We want to find what? Well, we want to find two things. We want to find carriage returns, which is \r. And we want to find new lines, which is \n. I'll come over here really quick and type that in the bigger screen. \r, \n. And we want to be able to replace it with something else. And what we want to be able to replace it with is this format, right? So if we highlight this format here, we have single quote, comma, space, single quote. So if we copy that and paste it down here, it looks exactly like that. So if we come back to Notepad++, we can paste that into replace with. And what this will do now is it will find every instance of a carriage return in a new line, and make sure you've got regular expression button clicked here on the bottom. And it will look for every instance of new character and carriage return, and it will replace it with single quote, comma, space, single quote. So let's go ahead and click replace all. And as you can see, it modifies our list, which is exactly what we wanted. We do need to do a little bit of modification. Here at the end, you see we've got VPN3, comma, space, single quote. Well, we don't need this last comma, space, single quote, so go ahead and delete that and replace it with a closing bracket. And we'll go all the way back here, and we're going to, we see there's no single quote in front of www. Again, this does not meet the syntax requirements for our subdomain array. So let's go ahead and do opening bracket, single quote, and now our list is set up to be able to be read within our Python program. So go ahead and select all and copy. If you did this like I did, delete those extra characters there, and you can paste in subdomain array. You can just paste your whole array. So if you had a different array there, delete it first. So as you saw, I just go ahead and delete this and then paste your new array in. There are other ways to achieve this. You could call from a file. You could call from this website directly, which I actually use in my MSDNS scan tool. And if you're curious, I'll have a link in the description below. You can see that tool on GitHub, and you can see how I integrate that into the functionality. I encourage you to figure out how to do that on your own. That'll be a bit of homework, so to speak. So if we come back, now we've got our subdomain array, but we're not calling from it yet. So let's go ahead and I'm going to pull up my notes so that I don't look like a fool. And now what we need to do is we've got our domain, we've got a subdomain. We need to define a function. And that's something I don't think we did in our last video. But a function basically is a separate program within the program. So if we define main as our function name, we're going to need to be able to call it later. So the way Python works and a lot of other programming languages work is it reads from the top to the bottom. So if we start at the top, we're importing, we're setting domain, we're setting subdomain. We don't do anything because this array is, or this function is not being executed. So this function will just sit here until something touches it, something calls it or executes it. So that's why we're going to put main down here. You see that we've got some squiggly lines. That's because of our indents. When we have a function, we need to indent one to the right to start off. So we've got define main, and then we've got a try statement. I thought about leaving this part till the end, but I'm just going to go ahead and knock it out now. If we run this, we have IP value. Sometimes domains and subdomains will have multiple IP addresses. This is for things such as load balancing. It's for backups. It's for fallbacks, etc. We don't want to get 10 or 15 www.youtube.com results back. It's going to look silly and bad within our subdomain list. We want one value per call here, right? Per resolution. So what we can do, we have we have an array here for our subdomains. What we can do is we can create a new array that we will put valid domain names into and use as a check as our program runs. So if it looks at the array and sees www there already, it won't try to run it again, which is really, really great. If you look at MSDNS scan, I do have it in there not like this, simply because I do want to pull those IP addresses up for things like external pen tests and web app assessments. But for what we're doing here, don't worry about it. If you want to learn more about it, just check that tool out and see how I did it there and see how you can integrate it. So let's go ahead and create subdomain store. And then we're going to do equals and then just open closing brackets. This array is empty, but what we'll do is we will append values into it here momentarily. So we need to do a for loop now. And if you did the last video, you remember for loops. So we need to do for subdoms in subdomain array. We need to call, we're saying that each one of these values, the variable will be subdom. So we're going to go subdomain array. So again, subdoms, we're assigning each individual subdomain here to subdoms as we call it with the for loop. And you can see we've got some squiggly lines, so let's go ahead and indent to the right one. And we have a try statement. Now what we want to do is we want to try each one of those subdomains in that for loop. So we're going to try IP value, DNS resolve. Now we need to change this value here because we don't have a subdomain variable anymore. We need to change it to the subdoms variable. So let's change that to subdoms. And we have our if IP value. What we need to do now is we want to, if it's true, we want to append that value to our subdomain store. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do subdomain store.append. And what we're going to do is with our F for our formatting here to call from our variables, let's do subdoms.domain. And what this is going to do is this is going to enter subdoms.domain, so the subdomain and domain name, into subdom store. And we can check that out here in a minute. We'll do some debugging. And now what we need to do is we need to call another if statement. We need to see if something else is true. So let's do if, and we're going to do this formatting specifically because this is the formatting of how it's going to be in the subdomain store, and I'll show you how that looks in a minute with a print statement. So if subdoms domain in subdomain store, we want to print subdomain found. We need to put this over to the right one. Keep in mind, if we just run it as is, this isn't going to print which subdomain though, right? So we need to modify that. So let's go ahead and get rid of subdomain. Let's put F, and let's put subdoms.domain, and we'll put valid. So if it finds that that value has been entered into the subdomain store, it will be valid. It's also checking to see if it's there. And then if it's there, we're going to do else pass. So if it's not in there, we're going to go ahead and pass. So now what we can do is accept DNS resolve. We've got that correct. But we want to not quit. And we don't want to print out this subdomain not found every time, right? So let's go ahead and do pass. So if it finds that NX domain is not there, it's not going to quit the program. Let's throw in and accept keyboard interrupt. And if we do that, we'll just go ahead and quit. And let's go ahead and save and see what our program does. So I'll do that. Remember, we don't have this subdomain value here anymore, so our first argument will be youtube.com. Let's go ahead and hit enter. And you can see right away we got youtube.com valid, we got m.youtube.com valid, but then we get a DNS resolver no answer. We're not getting an answer for test.youtube.com with an A record, so we need to add that exception as well. So let's do accept dns.resolver.noAnswer, and we'll pass that one as well. Hit save again. We'll clear this out so we see our results, and we'll go ahead and run it again. And as you can see, we're now getting subdomains back from our for loop. And each one of these is calling from up here within our subdomain array. So again, we see we've got www. If we go over the ways, we would see that we've got the M for mobile. There's going to be admin, news, etc. And it's pulling as it goes from each one of those values within the subdomain array. So each one of those subdomains. I highly encourage you, once you're done with this project, to check out MS-DNS-Scan. I'll have that again in the description down below. You can see how quickly it went through 1,000 subdomains. You don't need threading or whatnot. This is a really quick tool. Check out MS-DNS-Scan to see how I integrated it with IP addresses as well, to see if it's something that you would like to do that way differently. Also see how we're able to call from that word list that we copied and pasted for our subdomains here today. So I would love to hear how this project went for you down in the comments. Please let me know how it went. Please leave some likes as well. I am trying to grow the channel, and it's very, very, very difficult on YouTube. Look forward to another video as well coming up soon, where we're going to try to start integrating some of these things all together. I'm really excited how that's going to work. So again, hopefully you learned something here today. I really appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you again soon. Till then, take care.